Welcome to the 10th annual Detroit River Evening. My name is Kate Talon and I'm the manager of the Areas of Concern section at Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Detroit River Area of Concern is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, composed of the Anishinaabe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. I want to acknowledge also the mourning of Indigenous peoples following the discovery of the children's grave in Kamloops. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations of all the original peoples of Turtle Island, North America, who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Together with the Provincial Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks and other government agencies and non-government organizations, Environment and Climate Change Canada collaborates as members of the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup, or DRCC for short, as I'm sure many of you know, to coordinate and implement the Remedial Action Plan for the Detroit River Area of Concern. This, tonight, is our 10th annual meeting and Environment and Climate Change Canada's second time hosting the Detroit River Evening virtually. As you may know, the Detroit River Evening is an annual event coordinated by the DRCC to share with the local community progress made over the last year, not the least of which is the successful restoration of 2 beneficial use impairments and the completion of a comprehensive status report on phyto and zooplankton populations in the river. This is quite an impressive achievement, and my sincere congratulations to the DRCC for their hard work this past year. Tonight, you'll hear from Shane DeSola, a wildlife biologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, Kevin Money from the Essex Region Conservation Authority on terrestrial habitat restoration. You'll hear from Brianna Sands and Nikki Van Orscott from Caldwell First Nation on their environmental initiatives, as well as from Tom Henderson, who is the Public Advisory Council Chair with the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup. You will have noticed that your videos and microphones are unavailable. We will maintain this throughout the webinar. Any questions you have for the presenters can be put in the Q&A box, and we will go through them once all the presentations are complete. When asking a question, please indicate who the question is for. For those that are not familiar with the DRCC, the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup, this is a partnership responsible for implementing the Detroit River Remedial Action Plan, also called the RAP, or the Cleanup Plan. This plan aims to protect, restore, and enhance the Canadian Detroit River ecosystem. Due to the intense urbanization and industrialization, the aquatic environment of the Detroit River was severely degraded. In 1987, the river was designated as one of 43 Great Lakes Areas of Concern under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement between Canada and the US. The DRCC formed in 1998 to implement the Remedial Action Plan with many partners, including Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, which I think is now the Ontario Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, the Essex Region Conservation Authority, Indigenous partners, the City of Windsor, the University of Windsor, and others, too numerous to mention. The mandate of the DRCC is to restore the impaired beneficial uses of the river by addressing the legacy contamination and loss from local actions. Once all 14 beneficial uses have been restored, the Detroit River can be removed from the list of areas of concern. With recognition of the successful restoration of the 2 beneficial uses related to degradation of benthos and fish tumors or other deformities, the DRCC is getting closer to completely implementing the Remedial Action Plan and the end of Detroit River's time as an area of concern. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Jackie Saran, the local Remedial Action Plan coordinator for the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup, to provide an overview of the progress made on the Remedial Action Plan over the 20 to 21 year, including more details on redesignation of the 2 beneficial uses I just mentioned.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate it. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming to our 10th annual Detroit River Evening. We're happy to have you. Now, let's get started. So my presentation is entitled Tipping the Scales of Progress. And so it just highlights what the DRCC has been up to over the past year from 2020 to 2021. And so I wanted to start this evening off by learning a bit about you and who's joining us. So I have a little bit of a poll I'm hoping that you can help us fill out to determine where you're from and who's joining us. So Gina, if you could start that poll now, that would be awesome. Perfect. So you can see the first question just asks a bit about where you're from. And then the next question asks kind of a bit about your background. And then the third question, a bit about what is your favorite thing to do at the Detroit River. So I'll just give you another minute or so, and then we can show the results. Perfect. So it looks like, I'll just share you the results here. Looks like most of us are joining us from the Windsor-Essex area. So welcome. And most of the group is interested citizens. And the favorite thing to do near the Detroit River is to walk by the river. And I know that many people have been enjoying that this year as well due to COVID. And so thank you again for joining us. And so we'll get started here. And so as Kate mentioned, in 1987, the Detroit River was listed as a Great Lakes Area of Concern. And so we measured the cleanup of areas concerned through the 14 beneficial uses that you can see here on the screen. And so back in 2010, there was what we call stage 2 of the Remedial Action Plan. And so during stage 2, what we did was we went through all of the scientific evidence to determine what the status of each of these beneficial uses was for the Canadian side of the Detroit River. And so there were 3 potential statuses. So the beneficial use could either be impaired, meaning that it is environmentally degraded. It could be require further assessment, meaning that there wasn't enough information to determine whether it was not impaired or impaired. And then finally, the third status is not impaired. And so that means that there were no restrictions or environmental degradation of extreme extent for this beneficial use. And so back in 2010, this is kind of what those beneficial uses look like. So we have all the icons for the 14 beneficial uses on screen here. And you can see that the red ones are considered impaired as of 2010. There are 2 yellow ones, which are the ones that require further assessment. And then there were 3 green ones at that point in 2010. And so since 2010, we've been working to do remedial actions and restoration and activities like that to try to change the status of the impaired beneficial uses to be not impaired any further. And so I just wanted to highlight the progress over the last year or so. I won't get too in depth because we have some presenters who will provide more information about these projects, but just wanted to provide a high level overview. And so we do have a Peche Island erosion mitigation and fish habitat project going on. And so Peche Island is a city park that's located at the head of the Detroit River. And so basically what we're doing is we're going in and creating these kind of rock islands that you can see in the bottom right photo. And so those rock islands will provide fish habitat to the north of the island, as you can see here. And so Kevin Money will be providing more information on this project a little later in the evening. And then we also did research and monitoring. So some of our research and monitoring was unable to be done due to COVID-19, but we were able to go out and do a fish consumption survey. So we've been out on the river interviewing anglers about what they eat from the Detroit River, how much they eat, and who they share it with. And so that will help us inform our fish consumption beneficial use, which is currently considered impaired. And then we also have been doing a couple years of herring gull and cormorant research. And so Shane DeSala from Environment and Climate Change Canada is here to provide a bit more information about that in a bit. And so one of the things we also do is outreach and communication. So unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we weren't able to actually go out and do a bunch of in-person events, but we were able to do some virtual outreach events. And so we were able to attend about 10 outreach events virtually, and we were able to engage 2,500 people through those events. And so I also wanted to highlight that we did have our phyto and zooplankton beneficial use was considered required. It required further assessment in that 2010 stage 2 report. And so just to give an overview, plankton are small organisms that live in the water, and they're grouped into 3 general categories: phytoplankton, zooplankton, and microbes. And so plankton are an important food source for fish in the Detroit River. And so in 2019, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans went out and did a comprehensive study of zooplankton and phytoplankton in the river. And so that study was written into a report, which we put up on our website for public comment, as well as sent it out to our US colleagues for comment and Indigenous communities in the area. And so we received comment back from them, and they identified no concerns with our recommendation to change this beneficial use status from requires further assessment to no longer impaired. And so over the next couple months, we'll be submitting it for official redesignation. So hopefully in a few months, we can report back to you folks that it is no longer considered impaired for the Detroit River. And so I wanted to highlight some exciting news that Kate alluded to in her introductory remarks. And so that is that 2 beneficial uses are no longer considered impaired for the Detroit River on the Canadian side. And we received a notification of this from the governments on December 8th, 2020. And so our fish tumor and other deformities beneficial use is no longer considered impaired, as well as our degradation of benthos beneficial use. And so I just wanted to highlight, just provide a bit more information on what exactly that change in status was based on. And so although contaminants are still present in sediments in the Detroit River, research showed the prevalence of tumors in brown bullhead, which is our indicator species, are decreasing. And so researchers from the University of Windsor examined liver tumors in brown bullhead caught in the Detroit River. And so brown bullhead are really good environmental indicators, as they tend to show contaminants in their local environment. And so that's why we use brown bullhead specifically. And so the results of those studies show that liver tumors in brown bullheads have decreased to less than 1%, which is a rate that is lower than the Great Lakes background rate of 2%. And so these results really indicate that liver tumors in the Detroit River are no more prevalent than other Great Lakes sites. And so that's the main reason why the fish tumors and other deformities beneficial use was considered no longer impaired for the Canadian side of the Detroit River. And then the degradation of benthos, BUI, is also considered no longer impaired. And so benthos are groups of organisms made up of aquatic worms, insects, and other invertebrates which inhabit the bottoms of lakes and rivers. And so many benthos are a key food source for fish and frogs and other wildlife. And so results of studies in the river show that sediment contaminants have declined steadily between 1999 and 2013, and that the vast majority of the benthos communities showed minimal impairment on the Canadian side. And so those research studies really formed the evidence that we needed to change the status of this beneficial use. And so that's very exciting news. So I just wanted to highlight that this is what our scale kind of looked like in 2010, and this is what our scale looks like now. So we've made progress. We've been shifting that scale slowly towards the not impaired side, and we're looking forward to making more progress on that. And so I just wanted to highlight, we've also released our work plan. And so this is a living document that outlines the remaining activities needed to change the status of the remaining impaired beneficial uses to not impaired. And so this document can be viewed on our website, detroitriver.ca, under publications. And we also release an annual report every year at the Detroit River Evening. And so our annual report is also available under the publications tab on our website. And so I just wanted to highlight that the Detroit River is becoming a major destination for sport fishing. People come from all over the province to fish for silver bass and walleye. And we're seeing good progress with the return of species that haven't been seen in the Detroit River for decades. And so we really are making progress and strides towards our end goal, which is to remove the Detroit River from the list of areas of concern. And so I look forward to sharing with you the progress tonight. So with that introduction, we'll move on to the next item in our agenda. And so moving on, we're going to hear from Caldwell First Nation about their environmental initiatives. And so Caldwell First Nation is a First Nation community whose land base is located in Leamington, Ontario. And so recently, Caldwell First Nation actually secured a reserve status for an 80-hectare property on the band's traditional territory in Leamington, which is on the north shores of Lake Erie. And they have some amazing plans for these lands. Caldwell First Nation is extremely passionate about protecting their ancestral territory and exercises its responsibility to use, possess, and protect the air, waters, lands, and resources, as it has since time immemorial. And so according to customs, the people continue to work in harmony with Mother Earth to preserve, protect, harvest, hunt, and fish from the wealth of Mother Earth's resources. And so that respect continues today. And so we're extremely excited to welcome Brianna Sands, the Environmental and Consultation Coordinator, and Nikki Van Orscott, the Director of Operations from Caldwell First Nations, to our Detroit evening to present on environmental issues within their community and on their reserve lands. So without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Brianna, are you going to share the screen?
Yeah. Let me know when it starts.
Yep, and if you can just make it bigger, then we're good to go.
Okay. I pressed it. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. Alrighty. Thanks again for inviting us. We're really excited to be here and really appreciate that. So hello, everybody. My name is Brianna Sands. I'm the Environmental and Consultation Coordinator here at Caldwell First Nation, and I am joined today with Nikki. Nikki, I'll let you do an introduction. Sorry.
Thanks, Brianna. Ani Kinawea, Nikki Van Orscott, Indigenous, Caldwell First Nation, and Donjaba, Mikanakana Dodem, Ambe, Gaja Onjabayan, Minanagozi, Gawija, Bemosewaje, Gitchiag, Mashkawezi, Nandamoenkwe, and Nishnabikwe. Hello, everyone. So I am Nikki Van Orscott. I am from Caldwell First Nation. I'm Turtle Clan. I want to welcome you to our territory virtually, of course, and my spirit name means carry strong mind. I've been in this position at Caldwell First Nation for about 3.5 years. Very exciting progress that we're making on many fronts, and as Jacqueline had indicated, we've recently received reserve status on one of our properties located within Leamington, but we'll get into a little bit more of those details as we get through our presentation. So Brianna, next slide. So in terms of our history, I just want to offer some of this context of our history, because a lot of people really aren't aware of Caldwell First Nation's presence in the area, nor are they aware of where our traditional territory is and how we've come to be at the place that we're at today. So essentially, in 1790, representatives of certain First Nation groups surrendered a large tract of land in southwestern Ontario, which included Point Pelee, which was the home of Caldwell people. We were also known as People of the Lake, or Chippewas of Point Pelee and Pelee Island. However, Caldwell neither signed nor benefited from that treaty in 1790, so that was the McKee Treaty. We did serve, however, as allies of the British during the War of 1812, and the Caldwell leadership at the time relied on the promise of the return of land for service in the War of 1812, but those promises never actually materialized. As unbelievable as that may sound, it is part of our history and a part of Canada's history. Caldwell people did continue to occupy Point Pelee with the support of the Canadian government up until about the late 1850s. In the early 1880s, the Indian inspector suggested that Caldwell people settle on Walpole Island instead of trying to remain in the area. However, that did not materialize, and Caldwell people had started dispersing as a direct result of colonial settling. So what would happen was, there's a recommendation for us to go to different areas, and some people did. Some of the Caldwell people did go to other communities, but there still was a concentrated population in that area that sort of refused to leave, and they kind of said, we don't really belong at another nation, we're going to stay here. We're confident that the government's going to deliver these promises that, we've been told for generations. Unfortunately, the RCMP chased the remaining Caldwell people out of Point Pelee National Park, is what it's now known as, on horseback in the 1920s. They also burned their homes, burned their crops, and to make sure that they wouldn't have anything to return home to. So still though, Caldwell people continued to remain connected and persistent in the efforts in reclaiming which had been taken so many years ago, and hopeful that those promises would come to fruition. So moving forward in history, in 2010, not so long ago, the Crown publicly acknowledged this history through the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs. And Caldwell was finally able to settle an outstanding land claim at that time of 220 years. The lengthy process of colonization has definitely left its mark on the Caldwell people because we were left without a home. We were forced to relocate throughout Canada and the United States. But today, thanks to a legacy of strong, determined, and resilient ancestors, we have reclaimed attractive reserve land, which was converted officially on November 10th, 2020, so just a few months ago. And that is a 200-acre parcel of land in Leamington, and that is on the corner of Beveline and Seacliff, for anybody who's familiar with the Leamington area. So currently, we are awaiting and anticipating the return of many people over, of course, a period of time. In 230 years, we're not expecting people to all return in a couple of years. So that's something that we're eagerly anticipating and making active plans for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get through this presentation. So that basically is a really short, long history of the Caldwell people and how we come to this area and why the Detroit River is significant to us. Although we had people living in Point Pelee area, Point Pelee and Pelee Island, our traditional territory actually is quite expansive. So it actually goes east to Long Point and north to the Detroit River. So certainly a very integral part of our history, food sources, and I'm sure lots of travel in the water, fishing, and other traditional practices. So that is essentially where our history is today. And so I'll just ask Brianna to go to the next slide.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki. I'm just going to speak a little bit about Caldwell First Nation and some of the principles and the strategies today, and something that I get to see every day. Caldwell is extremely passionate about being stewards of the land, and this involves, the responsibility to take care of the environment, air, land, waters, resources, as it has from time immemorial. And while we do this, we ensure that the protection and the respect of the environment. And so there are several kind of principles and strategies that contribute to this environmental stewardship and that guide the work today. And some include environmental sustainability. Caldwell First Nation has undertaken several environmental projects that promote sustainability, which also includes the 7 generation teachings. So we consider obviously the future generations as well. And so that's one principle when planning and doing projects. And it's also integrated in a lot of aspects of planning. In addition to that, we also do conservation and restoration. And so Caldwell First Nation has gone through some restoration projects on their traditional territory. And on these properties, we have partnered with local organizations to restore the land, and this is often done through tree planting opportunities, as well as total transformation of lands that include the creation of ideal habitats for many species found in the local area, and also have been very successful. We're also in discussions for potential future projects, which is really exciting. Also, consultation, I think, plays a really big role in just being stewards of the land and really planning for the future. And so Caldwell has created a consultation department which promotes the organization of incoming consultations in their traditional territory. Many of these consultations have the ability to impact the land, air, and water of their traditional territory. And this department works with leadership and the community to identify and prioritize consultations to ensure that Caldwell is informed of environmental projects and other projects. It's also a good way to build relationships with local organizations and get the community involved, do projects in and with other organizations outside the nation. And then holistic planning. So Caldwell's approach to planning is holistic in nature. They take into consideration lots of aspects, the 7 generations into the future, and they also value the responsibility to care for the environment along the way. Environmental sustainable practices are always promoted and are a priority. So during this holistic planning, we plan for cultural revitalizations, cultural consideration, which is really important. The connection to the land and the health in that connection is extremely important to Caldwell. So that's always taken into consideration. And then partnerships for environmental projects. We connect and build relationships with local environmental organizations and companies that foster positive relationships, which result in collaborative work that collectively, as we strive to goals for environmental sustainability. And this includes the restoration projects, tree planting, gardens, and having community members really involved, and information sharing for species at risk found in the area. And then some kind of examples of this is that we've worked with IRCA and the DRCC and Point Pelee National Park. So yeah, just a couple principles in different ways.
Brianna,
yeah.
I just wanted to add something. A really good point that you made was the holistic aspect of, including culture into that. And just a point I wanted to make is connection to the land is really integral, not only to our culture and language, but it's also integral to decolonization. So there have been a lot of studies done around the world that have proven that the loss of land equals the loss of language and loss of culture. And this is really important for Caldwell First Nation, because as you've just heard the history, you've realized that we've had a disconnection from the land. So therefore, we've also had a disconnection to our traditions and to our language. So it's very fundamental for us to be able to have this connection back to the land, so we can really start reconnecting with those traditions and our culture and our language. So it's a holistic approach. We don't just look at one aspect and how one thing might impact something. We really look at that big picture and how they're all interconnected. So it was a really good point, Brianna.
Thank you. And so I'm going to continue on with consultation. So in my department, we, like I said, we do consultation. So through the duty to consult, the Crown is required to consult Caldwell on any decisions or projects that may impact Caldwell's traditional territory. And so Caldwell receives a number of consultations on a weekly basis, and these projects can range from small to large, vary in size, and I guess length, duration of how long they might be ongoing for. And so Caldwell has actually created an online consultation tool, Consult with Caldwell, which allows for a streamlined process to review consultations that are submitted online. And this tool allows proponents to identify environmental risks and impacts, and in various categories: land, air, water, among other impacts, social, economic, etc. And from here, the team works closely with leadership to prioritize projects and evaluate those based on impacts and other factors. This tool is one of a kind, and so the creation of this tool is actually, there was engagement with the community, and so I do believe this was over the course of a year or so, right, Nikki? I'm not sure.
Yes, that's correct. From the inception, the conversation with Cisco and Associates, we were discussing a potential triage system on how to determine what are more urgent, environmentally impactful projects, and so in these discussions, it was determined that Cisco had done some work in the past, but never produced a tool. So we're actually the first First Nation who has this type of a tool that we can use to our benefit. So it's definitely one of a kind, and it was definitely more than a year in process, but we're very happy to be launching it now.
Yes, we're very excited. So this tool really allows the consultation team to keep members informed on projects, and then just provide information. So that really allows Caldwell's voice to be heard. So I also want to go on to another initiative, I suppose, or a way that we are environmentally sustainable. So we have Caldwell's Green Committee, and so this is made up of staff and members who, the main purpose of it is to advocate for environmental health through identifying and addressing environmental issues. The committee will provide provides an avenue for staff and members to share their ideas and concerns, as well as discuss traditional, new, or changing ecological knowledge, environmental legislation and regulations, conservation efforts, environmental sustainability in the natural world in relation to overall quality of life for all inhabitants. The Green Committee is an advisory committee for staff members established to offer advice and recommendations to CFN in support of environmental protection. We have a team that meets and discusses how Caldwell can be more sustainable and steps that we can take for staff and members. And so this is a kind of a newer initiative. And so we were able to meet and then discuss on a monthly basis to give information to the members. And so we were able to do this via newsletter and email, just to give tips and provide other information that might help support green initiatives and environmentally sustainable practices. And so now I'm going to go into a little bit more of the environmental initiatives and the planning for the future. Tree planting. And so Caldwell, as I mentioned earlier, has gone through a couple of different tree planting initiatives and opportunities. We've partnered with IRCA. And so here in the pictures I took some pictures of the different initiatives that we had. So tree planting on properties. The top one is a property that's located near farmland, but it's also near Hillman Marsh. And then the bottom one is the restoration site, which we'll get into a little more later. And so we're actively having some discussions about future potential projects. And so moving forward, we have the Sturgeon Creek restoration site. And so I would like to thank IRCA for providing these pictures and the information and some information for me to be able to present today and give me some background information. So this project began in 2017 in partnership with IRCA, and the goal was to take the marina and Sturgeon Creek and transform and restore it to support the species found in the land in the area, and the land and the water in the area, by increasing coastal wetland habitat and creating ideal features to promote the health of the ecosystem. And together, we were able to restore the land to its natural state. And this included removing infrastructure on the land, break wall, there was boat docks, etc. The walls were replaced with shoreline protection measures that were more natural, rocks and different sediments, as well as vegetation that would protect against erosion along the water's edge. Ideal habitats for species were created along the shoreline, on the space, and on the land itself. And we planted native wildflowers and vegetation such as trees, grasses, etc., which provided a variety of habitats. And so here you can see some before pictures. And you can see there's break wall and just some grass area. And then I'll go forward and you can kind of see what it looks like today. And so I had taken these pictures a couple days ago, actually, when it was a nice day. And so from here, you can kind of see that the growth of the wildflowers and the vegetation and the trees that had been planted. And there are rocks to protect the inland areas from wave energy. And they had created turtle nesting areas, and materials that were used were to make it easier for turtles to burrow in the wintertime. And then included the creation of snake hibernaculum. And also this area contains an off-spray platform. And then since then, it has been home to many species, and some notable ones are the snapping turtle, the spiny soft-shelled turtle, and the northern map turtle. Since we've gone to the site, we have plans to kind of move forward and make a management plan and see how we can maintain and make sure the health of the area is intact and just moving forward. So it's really exciting stuff. We get to kind of monitor and just see all the work, all the hard work pay off and be really successful. So that's super exciting. It's a nice success story. Nikki, if you wanted to add anything before we move on.
Yeah, just This is a really exciting project that took place for Caldwell. This is before my time. I started in 2018, I believe, and this had already been completed. But it's definitely a point of success for Caldwell. It's something that was committed to, and it takes quite a commitment, as you can see. And IRCA obviously was very instrumental in this, but you know, it was quite a large undertaking. But we're seeing the benefits now. It's a very peaceful site to be at. It's close to the water, and I was there the other day as well. And there's really amazing activity that's going on with some endangered species and the habitats that are being formed and the plants that are growing there now. So it was really a great investment of land and obviously investment of resources because we're seeing the benefits today. This is an inspiration for us, you know, and a comparison to say this is the kind of thing that we can be doing as stewards of the land. We can counteract the effects of settlement and the effects of other things that are going on around us. As you can see, there's a campground in the back, but in spite of that, we can still provide such a healthy home for so many species. And so it's been a very big success story for us. So Chimigwech to IRCA for their support with this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to touch on a couple other initiatives that Caldwell has taken part of. So recently we have distributed garden kits, and that's one to every household of Caldwell, and it involved and included multiple vegetable seeds, so a variety of them. And this is just a way for the members to kind of connect with the land and have a sustainable food source. So that was really exciting. And then also prior to COVID, we did Point Pelee beach cleanup. And it was interesting because what they found was there was a lot of cigarette butts actually that were found on the beach. So there's a large volume of it. Yeah, so this was something that they would like to do, I believe, annually, but before COVID. And then Detroit River. So Caldwell is actually involved with the BUI review for the Phytoplankton and Zooplankton in the Detroit River area concerned. And so we were able to engage the community on this BUI in particular, these BUIs. And we were able to kind of give a report and engage the community, which really allowed Caldwell to provide feedback, concerns, and have their voice heard, which was really exciting. And it just allows for us to be really informed and involved in the work being done in their traditional territory. And we're definitely looking forward to being involved in the future. Also, species habitat build. So Caldwell First Nation has had several events where members were able to build bird houses and bat boxes for different species found in their area, and members were able to take it home. So it was just a nice way for the community to kind of get together and get some information about the species that are found in the area. So it was educational, and it was just a really good way to connect to the land and for species in the area. And then also solar technology. So Caldwell has a couple buildings that actually have solar panels on the tops of the buildings. So that's just a few other initiatives and different ways that we have been environmentally sustainable and just, again, working towards stewards of the land, responsibility, taking care of the land. And so,
I'll talk about the Youth Advisory Committee. So we have a number of committees at Caldwell First Nation that those positions are filled by band members. They're not staff members. We do have staff members that support the administrative functions of them. One elected council member sits as chair, and we have a minimum of 3 band members that sit on these committees. So our Youth Advisory Committee currently is quite a young group. So they are age 12, 13, 15 and 16, I believe, so quite young compared to many other youth committees. So for what they're accomplishing and doing and the ideas that are flowing from them and the initiatives, it's quite impressive. So one of the commitments that they were able to receive from the elected council is a commitment to building a net zero community and looking at passive homes so that we're minimizing our impacts on the environment. And so that was very exciting. So we do have a formal BCR, so that's a band council resolution. That's a formal commitment from council to utilize sustainable practices in building out our reserve. So it's very exciting. Land stewardship as well, very much connected to being responsible and even down to very small changes. They ran some social media campaigns. They had a survey in the community to ask them for ideas and how can we make, you know, the environment, you know, how can we be more environmentally friendly. So they're working on those initiatives as well. They're also working, I believe, with the island. I think they're working with the island on developing some strategies as well. Cultural revitalization is obviously another key component for them, and they're actually having some research conducted on some of our origins and our roots, and there's some really interesting information that's being uncovered. Perhaps even our first documented history of smelting back from, I believe, the 1700s. So it's very interesting things that they're achieving and things that they're doing. So that's been pretty exciting. Brianna, on the next slide is that where we talk about personhood status, or is this where I'm supposed to talk about that? Okay.
I think this one is.
Okay. The other thing that they're working on is there's a petition that they're working on. They're trying to revitalize it because they were working on it quite heavily, and then COVID, of course, hit. So they doing a traditional paper and signature type of petition to get personhood rights for Lake Erie. So this was spearheaded by an older youth advisory committee member who's since moved on to, you know, education and that kind of thing. But they're trying to reinvigorate that cause. And so what they're wanting to do is get some protection for the lake. So if there's any sort of pollution or activity that's happening, that it's really looked upon as you know, similar to as if you would assault a person, right? That there are fines associated with harming something that's alive. And for Indigenous people in particular, water is life. And so it's very closely connected to our culture and to our beliefs. And as we know, we all can't live without water, and we're made mostly up of water. So it's very important that we take care of those bodies of water. Next slide, Brianna. So in terms of reserve planning, so this is a picture of our reserve. There's nothing happening here just yet. Lots of things happening behind the scenes. And behind the scenes, again, what we're working on is sustainable development, net zero community. We do have a master plan that's seen a couple of revisions, so we're not quite ready to share it. And we're having discussions, of course, with the municipality to make sure we're connected to all the municipal services that we need in order to develop this reserve. This 200-acre piece of land is large enough to house our entire community. So it's a residential development. It's an urban reserve. And that really speaks to our responsibility to the land. It would be very easy to give people several acres of land and do mass development, but the focus that we've had is really on a traditional side, more communal living type of situation. Now, that's not to say we'll have shared homes, but the way we will cluster the homes together will promote that. And then we will also have green spaces, so walking trail. Thanks, Brianna. Green spaces, our residential areas will be very cost effective in terms of being passive or net zero. We'll have some perhaps industrial development, but certainly commercial development, and places to practice culture. So there will be a powwow grounds. There'll be an area for sacred ceremonies. There'll be a walking trail, like I said, water as well will be there, a pond. And so it really connects all of those pieces for an Indigenous community and all the things that we connect to. So the people, our culture, the land, the water. And so we're very excited when we can start to share some of those plans out. But that's just kind of a glimpse of what we're working on for what our reserve is going to look like. So very exciting. I wish I could share more information and a visual, but I'm not at liberty just yet. So we will be doing that as soon as we can. So that is pretty much our presentation. Very happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share information about Caldwell First Nation and to IRCA and everybody for organizing this event.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited about being here and happy to answer any questions at any time.
Yeah, thanks, Brianna and Nikki. I think we'll hold off on questions until the end of the event, but if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box below and we'll do our best to get to that at the end of the event. Thanks again, Nikki and Brianna. I really appreciate it. And so moving on in the agenda, to assess the wildlife reproduction and deformities beneficial use for the Detroit River, a study was initiated in 2015 to investigate reproduction and contaminant exposure in nesting colonial water birds. And so now we're going to hear from Shane DeSola from Environment and Climate Change Canada, who is one of the lead scientists who examined herring gull and cormorant deformities in the river. And he'll tell us a bit about what the researchers did and found. So Shane, take it away.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. You're good to go.
Okay, sorry. I've got to turn off the mute. So you can see everything full size?
Yes.
Okay. To apologize for one thing, unlike the previous talk, my talk is mostly graphs and figures, so I hope you have your caffeine available. So I'll be talking about the colonial water birds and contaminants in the Detroit River AOC. I have, oops, how do I go? There we go. So I'll be looking at basically two major questions. One's on contaminants in eggs colonial water birds. You know, are they going down or are they staying about the same? What the spatial trends are like? How does, you know, the contaminants in gulls and cormorants in Detroit River compare to from other sites in the Great Lakes? And we'll also be looking at the health of colonial water birds. And there's an interesting question which I won't be addressing, but where are they? I'll be talking about that very briefly. So we're looking at two colonial water birds, herring gulls and double-crested cormorants. Just for those who are in the audience, most of the gulls you see in the Detroit River are actually ringbills. Herring gulls are actually not that common, and they actually eat a lot more fish than ringbills, which you often find outside McDonald's or, you know, farmers' fields and that sort of thing. Herring gulls eat mostly aquatically, although they occasionally will feed terrestrially, and double-crested cormorants are obligate piscivores, eat nothing else but fish. And so most contaminants in the gulls and all the contaminants you see in cormorants are actually from the Detroit River per se, as opposed to terrestrial sources. So just so you know, this is actually part of a larger program. This is part of the Great Lakes Herring Gull Monitoring Program, which was initiated back in 1974, and we assess contaminants and health of birds all the way across the Great Lakes, including some sites in the US. Today we're just talking about the Detroit River, and because of technical, or I should say logistical issues, also from colonial water birds just south of the Detroit River. That is the Middle Island, Middle Sister Island, which is just outside the Detroit River AOC. So here is our initial study sites in the Detroit River. We were assessing colonial water birds in Fighting Island, or the herring gulls at least, and we also were studying herons from Turkey Island, which is just south of it. But in 2012, all the colonial water birds on the Canadian side of the Detroit River disappeared. They just up and left. So there are no more colonial water birds breeding in the Canadian side of the Detroit River, which is a bit problematic when they're trying to assess the health of them. However, we found a colony of double-crested cormorants on the island, which we called Shag Island. Shags is a British name for cormorant. And we also had access to colonies of herring gulls in Middle Sister Island and Middle Island, which is both of which are immediately downstream of the Detroit River. And so we're using these as surrogates for the herring gulls that used to be in Fighting Island. And of course, the cormorants are still in the Detroit River. You can see on the very left-hand side what Shag Island looks like. It's barely called an island. Is basically two dead trees and a little tower that's where the cormorants are actually breeding. So the first part would be I'll be talking about spatial and temporal trends in contaminants in colonial water birds. PCBs are the dominant contaminant you see in gull eggs. And you can see in Fighting Island and Middle Island, the concentrations have dropped considerably from the early 1970s, particularly in Fighting Island. Not quite as much for Middle Island, but still for both colonies, the concentration has gone down, quite a bit. The interesting thing is that from about mid-1990s to now, there hasn't been much change. So the concentrations, for example, in Middle Island in just last year, or not last year, sorry, 2018, were pretty much the same as has been in 1996. So for the last 25 years, concentrations have been pretty much flatlined. So there has been an initial big change or big drop in PCB levels, and then basically been rather stacked for the last 2.5 decades. And this is true for many of the legacies such as DDE and dioxins and other contaminants like that. Not for everything, however, if we're looking at mercury, and this is mostly methyl mercury, which is the organic and also more toxic form of mercury, there really hasn't been, other than a little blip back in the 2000s, there really hasn't been much change overall. It's pretty much the same level now as it was back in the 1970s. This is a rather interesting one. It's not as well known contaminant, polychlorinated naphthalines. They're not quite as abundant as PCBs, but they're very similar and they were used in similar manner. They were first, I think, produced back in the 1920s or so in the United States. The concentrations were actually fairly high in the 1980s. You can see they actually dropped to 1990s, but there was actually resurgence both in herring gulls and in walleye, which is large predatory fish, in Western Lake Erie. So the concentrations actually went up in the late 1990s to early 2000s before they started to decline again by the mid 2010s. Now, in terms of more recent spatial comparisons, we now jump into double-crested cormorants, because the reason why is that there's no herring gulls in the Detroit River, but we do still have cormorants at least breeding in the Detroit River. So since 2015, we've been assessing double-crested cormorants. So not just here, but throughout the Great Lakes. And here's how the Detroit River compares to the other Great Lakes sites. In terms of PCBs, the cormorants from Shag Island in the Detroit River has the highest concentrations on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes in Canada. The concentrations of pesticides are a bit more similar, but as I said, most of the contaminants are actually PCBs. You can see that they actually beat out Hamilton and Toronto in terms of contaminants. In terms of mercury, it's a different story, however. They're about average for the Great Lakes, and they're much lower than the concentration of mercury that you see in cormorants from the eastern part of the Great Lakes, such as in sort of Kingston to Cornwall area. So Detroit River is sort of like average compared to most other sites. And interestingly enough, Hamilton Harbor actually has the lowest level of mercury in cormorant eggs. Now this PCNs, again, is a rather interesting story. We don't have as much data as we have in PCBs or mercury, but we did do a retrospective analysis of archived eggs that we had, and we analyzed it not in every colony, but in a number of them. And what we found is that concentrations in gull eggs from Lake Superior were really low. But this graph, which you see in the top right-hand corner, that is going from upstream to downstream. And you can see as soon as you hit the Detroit River, the concentrations go much higher. And then it declines with distance from Detroit River until you hit Montreal, pretty much. So it appears that Detroit River is probably one of the main sources of PCNs, or polychlorinated naphthalines, into the lower Great Lakes. Thankfully, we aren't actually using these compounds anymore, so we presume that they're going to just keep declining over time. We also assessed the health of colonial water birds, both of cormorants and from herring gulls in the Great Lakes. And we did two ways. One, we used this incubator, which you can see on the right, where we took eggs and actually put in the incubator and hatched them out to look at how many actually hatch and look at deformities. And for the gulls, we did enclosures. So we actually put enclosures around the gull nests that we found. And then we would visit them and then look at hatching success, or it's not hatching success, fledgling success and other aspects of their health. So first, cormorants. And the reason why we use incubators, because all the cormorants that we can find in the Detroit River are tree nesters. And so it makes it really hard to assess them in the wild. So we took the eggs back into the lab. And we got eggs from 3 areas. Shag Island, which is on the Detroit River proper, and Middle Sister Island, which is downstream, just outside the AOC boundary. but it still gets the basically outflow of all the chemicals that you get from the Detroit River. And Black Rock and Mohawk Island, which are 2 reference sites. And as you can see in this graph that the viability, the hatching success of cormorants pretty much, well, first of all, they're high everywhere. And secondly, there's no difference. So Detroit River and reference site had pretty much the same hatching success. They're about 85% of the eggs actually hatched. However, we did find that the eggs from the Detroit River had about 6% of the chicks actually had deformities. We found 2 types. We found deformed beaks and also poorly developed stomachs, where the stomach outline actually would not really close. So when the chicks were about to hatch, you could actually see the intestines because the stomach didn't actually close. And similar with Middle Sister Island, we found 4% deformities, but we found 0% at Mohawk Island. Just to put this in perspective, years ago, back in the 70s, there were really high levels of deformities, at least in some sites in the for double-crested cormorants in Great Lakes. And these were the same type of deformities that we saw that were seen way back in the 1970s and early 1980s. However, we did see them at lower rates here. Now, in terms of the herring gulls, as I said, we put enclosures around the nests in these 2 sites in, downstream of the Detroit River and Middle Sister Island, and one right beside called Big Chicken Island. I don't know why it's called Big Chicken. I don't think there were any wild chickens in the island before. In any case, we are looking at productivity. That's the number of chicks that make it to fledging, or just at the point where they can start flying away per nest. And we also looked at for any chick deformities. We found no deformities anywhere. And productivity, although it did seem to vary from colony to colony, the more important thing is that the productivity from all colonies, including Middle Sister Island and Big Chicken Island, were above levels that are needed to maintain a stable population. So these are fairly healthy levels of productivity of herring gulls. As I said, we didn't find any deformed chicks. We also looked at other measures of health. I'm only going to show one other one here. We look at body condition, and that's basically how, well, animals that have higher body condition have basically greater weight per body size as they're fatter. Presumably they're healthier because they have more energy reserves. And what we did find in this case is that the chicks from Big Chicken Island and Middle Sister Island downstream of the River had lower body condition. That is, they had less body reserves compared to the chicks from the reference site. And it could be any number of factors that can actually contribute to lower body condition. I mean, it could be contaminants, but also competition, disturbance, or disease can also impact body condition in birds. And that is it. So I presume that the questions will be saved until the end.
Yes, please, Shane. We'll have a big Q&A session at the end. So thanks very much, Shane. That was great. And so we look forward to taking the next steps towards redesignating this beneficial use in the Detroit River, hopefully soon. And so moving on, Kevin Money is here to talk a bit about the loss of fish and wildlife habitat beneficial use. And so I just wanted to highlight that the loss of fish and wildlife habitat beneficial use delisting criteria has a terrestrial habitat component. And so this component of the beneficial use will be considered not impaired when existing natural terrestrial corridors are protected and ecosystem function is restored between the Detroit River and the Ojibwe Prairie Complex, the SAL candidate natural heritage sites, and other major identified habitat sites. And so Kevin Money, the Director of Conservation Services at the Essex Region Conservation Authority, will highlight progress towards meeting this delisting criteria through terrestrial restoration efforts by the Conservation Authority. And so Kevin, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Jackie. I appreciate that. I thought I'd start off by just showing you this picture. This is the Detroit River. This is a hidden lake in the Detroit River, in case anybody's wondering where that picture is taken with that beautiful clear water. All right, next slide, please. Okay. In case anybody doesn't actually know what a conservation authority is, there's a number of conservation authorities across the province of Ontario. We are in the very southwest. We're labeled as Essex, but there's actually 36 conservation authorities. And all conservation authorities are organized in a very similar way, and we exist because of some provincial legislation. And we all have the exact same mandate, but each of the priorities and individual efforts of conservation authorities differ based on the individual watersheds that we reside in, and our efforts reflect the priorities of our municipalities and the people that reside in them. So what we do down here is probably very different than what a conservation authority does in Northern Ontario. One of the primary things that we do, and we're known for, is undertaking restoration. Next slide, please. So today we're focusing on the Detroit River watersheds, and there's kind of everybody knows the Detroit River proper, but we also, from a conservation authority perspective, look at the entire watershed, and that includes all of the land that drains into the Detroit River. So in this case, that's the Canard River, that's Tricky Creek, that's Little Creek, and a few other smaller watersheds in the city of Windsor and Amherstburg that drain directly into the river. And the watershed is more than just the river itself. It's all of the farm fields, it's all of the residential neighborhoods, it's all of the wetlands, and the city parks, everything. And what we do in those areas has a direct impact on the water within the Detroit River. Next, please. So as Jackie said, today I'm focusing on BUI number 14. BUI stands for Beneficial Use Impairment, number 14, and it's related to the loss of fish and wildlife habitat. There are kind of, under that broad heading, there's four kind of main ones: coastal wetlands, aquatic and riparian habitat, shorelines, and terrestrial habitat. And the map that I'm showing on the right-hand side there is from 2007. In 2007, a group of individuals from various agencies got together and said, these are some of the important habitats that we should be trying to protect and connect. And since then, the Conservation Authority has been diligently working at trying to build and create habitat. So we've been doing a number of efforts with a number of different types of habitat. So I think the next slide is the start of some of the different types of habitat that we build. So rather than show just a picture of what we do in terms of fish habitat, we thought we'd treat you to a small video. So I asked Jackie to play the video to explain what we do as it relates to fish habitat.
Where we are right now is on the north side of Peche Island on the Detroit River. Two things that we're doing here right now is trying to protect the island itself from further erosion by creating these reefs here, or rock islands. The island has lost probably around 17 acres of land over the last 50 years, and part of why these islands are being put in place is to reduce that significantly. The other reason we're building these islands is to create some habitat. On the other side of those islands, it's quite rough, it's windy out today, while on this side it's actually quite calm. And what we want to do is create this calm backwater area here on this side of these islands or reef in order to try to create some good fish habitat. We do that through having nice calm areas where a lot of plants have the opportunity to establish and grow. Submerged aquatic vegetation, you don't see them on the surface, they're down below. And when you have those calm areas, you can get that. That then creates perfect habitat for many fish species, especially the endangered species that live in the river.
Well, the core material has already been placed, and that's what's emerging out of the water that you can see. Contractors just starting to place the armor stone on this most westerly of the islands, and then they'll work their way back to the east and cover all of the outer side of the island with the armor layer first, and then they'll move to the inside, weather permitting, and finish the armor layer on the inside as well. The intention is to complete these islands, these 4 islands, before winter sets in, and then next year, when we're able to get back in the water, then they'll focus on the northeast side of the island, and a substantial amount of revetment will be placed at that time to protect the head of the island.
This is a great opportunity for the City of Windsor and the Essex Region Conservation Authority to partner together to address issues that we're having on this island, as well as create such an amazing habitat project for the local environment. The city has secured about $2.5 million in funding from the federal government through the federal gas tax towards this project. And further to that, IRCA, through their sources, have managed to secure an additional over $500,000 in funding from various other sources. So a significant amount of money going into this project, but the only issue is that we're actually only be able to do about 40% of this project with the current funding that we have. So we're going to get as much as we can, bang for our buck, and see if we can secure additional funding in the future to do more work.
All right, thank you, Jackie. You can probably just put it to the next slide. Anyway, so that gives you a sense of what our fish habitat projects look like. We also do native gardens within the Detroit River AOC, and in fact, Gina is a big part of that effort. Native gardening is a fabulous thing, and it's really taking off. And ultimately, it means using native pollinators and other types of native plants instead of non-native plants in your gardens. And it's a fabulous way to create habitat on a smaller scale. And we've done this with many schools and in community gardens in the AOC. Next slide, please. Prairie habitat. So the Conservation Authority does have the equipment and know-how to, and actually we do build and make prairie habitat. This is a fabulous picture taken by one of our staff, Russ Jones, that he gave us. It's actually close to Ojibwe, where there's obviously the famous Ojibwe prairie, which is a really significant feature. But beyond that, we actually build habitat similar to this on many properties. Next slide, please. Shorelines. So this is Goose Bay, City of Windsor Park, and this shows some of the shoreline works that we undertook there in partnership with the city. So ultimately, it's about stabilizing the shoreline, creating some erosion protection, but also creating habitat for fish and wildlife that reside just right up against the shore. Again, these are fabulous projects to soften that shoreline. It's far better than a vertical steel wall for habitat and wildlife. And we do enjoy these projects and like to see this shoreline softening. Next slide, please. Tree planting. So this is the back of one of our tree planters, where right there you can see us planting some white pines in a row. So every year the Conservation Authority undertakes significant tree planting, except last year. Actually, that's the only year we didn't do it, and that was due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But normally we plant anywhere from 60 to 100,000 trees throughout the entire region, and many of those trees end up in the Detroit River AOC. We work with our municipal partners as well as private landowners to plant the vast majority of these trees. Next slide, please. Wetlands. So this is another thing that we do. This is a constructed wetland. So this was a farm field at one point. And we went in and we did the design and development and turned this field into a wetland. There's a lot of prairie habitat around it that's coming up. And then the remainder of the field that you can't see was actually put into trees. So this is just a quick example of what we mean by wetlands when we talk about wetlands a little later when you see the statistics. Next. Okay. So the primary purpose of this particular study and showing you all of this is just to kind of give you a sense of the types of projects that we do on the landscape within the AOC or the Detroit River watersheds, and just to provide you with some scope. So over the past 20 years, the Conservation Authority, in partnership with many people, have been able to actually do 277 projects. You can see that breakdown from the fish habitat all the way over to the wetland of all those different types of projects and the numbers of each. We then took it a step further to not just count the number of projects, but what is the physical area associated with them, and we mapped them out. So we're quite pleased to let everybody know that there's actually approximately 1,200 acres of property that we've restored within the Detroit River watersheds, which is just fabulous. And what that means is that we continue to every year, piece by piece, improve the local habitat and try to build those connections. Part of this project was to just kind of assess where we are in terms of this particular BUI number 14, loss of fish and wildlife habitat, and take a snapshot to check on progress. So we did some mapping associated with this as well. Next slide, please. So this is a map showing you where all of these different habitat projects are. They're actually spread out through the entire region. Some of them are small and some of them are quite large. This is kind of the geographic scope showing exactly where all of these are. And then we started adding layers to this. So for instance, if you go to the next slide, please, Jackie, what you can actually see is some of the habitat corridors. So this shows existing habitat within our region. So things like Spring Garden and the LaSalle Woods, and those two long linear features are actually, one of them is the Chrysler Canada Greenway, and the other one is the Cipher Systems Greenway, because many of our trail features actually double as habitat for many forms of wildlife. So this provides an overview of where all this habitat is within the AOC. Next slide, please. And this shows some of the connections, the potential connections to the river and where we should really be trying to focus our efforts over the long term, and to try to eliminate or reduce the impact that we've had on the landscape, and try to build these connections with the river itself. And in our goal or effort to actually try to delist the river and try to say the loss of habitat is no longer an issue within the Windsor-Essex region. We're not there yet, but this definitely gives us a lot of hope that we're getting much closer to that. Next slide, please. So I want to show you all of these habitat sites as it relates to the ones that we've been doing compared to the priority habitat sites. Those are the sites that were originally noted in the 2007 report that I noted earlier in this presentation. Say, well, these are the sites that are important. These are important natural areas. And you can see where we've actually completed some habitat projects to try to fill in these areas and try to build upon these important areas. And we've done a lot of other projects beyond that, typically with private landowners. Next slide, please. And what this shows in pink, it's hard to see, sorry, it shows a lot of identified restoration project going forward. So those are the kind of the key focal areas where we should be focusing our effort in terms of restoration going forward, trying to plant more trees in here, engage with more landowners, and try to build these connections between these, both our new woodlots as well as the existing natural habitat that exists. So it's been this is a really good exercise, and what it does is it provides us with a snapshot of progress over the last 20 years. And then it provides us with a good footing for trying to figure out what those next steps are to actually achieve that delisting and figure out how much habitat we need to build in order to create those connections and say when we have a solid foundation within our region in order to delist the Detroit River. Next slide. That's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. And so next, an important component of the Detroit River Remedial Action Plan is involvement from the public. And so the Public Advisory Council of the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup is a voluntary group of individuals that come together to participate in the cleanup effort. They are the eyes and ears of the area of concern and are dedicated to ensuring that the river water quality and the ecosystem are improved and protected for all users of the river. I would like to welcome Tom Henderson, Chair of the Detroit River Canadian Public Advisory Council, to provide an update on recent Public Advisory Council activities.
All set?
Good to go, Tom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie. At the Windsor City Council meeting of June 7th, 2021, Windsor Council endorsed local MP Brian Massey's letter to federal ministers calling for the establishment of an Ojibwe National Urban Park on the river, encompassing the Ojibwe Prairie Complex and Ojibwe Shores, 900 acres, all within the boundaries of the city of Windsor. Massey's letters went to the Transport Minister, the Ministries of Infrastructure and Communities, as well as Environment and Climate Change Canada. Those ministries were informed that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has publicly voiced his support for establishing the Ojibwe National Urban Park. As information becomes available, the Public Advisory Council and the Steering and Implementation Committee members will be updated on the campaign's progress. We have not heard anything since Mr. Massey delivered the letters, but we're all ears in case something happens. The next item is the Revere Copper property, it's called, on the US side of the Detroit River, just downstream, not far from the Ambassador Bridge to the west of the bridge. It was the site of a major shoreline collapse and spill in November 2019. Chemical waste went straight to the bottom and other pollutants were swept downstream. A very catastrophic event. Now, the city of Detroit is being urged to pass an ordinance that would prevent such spills from recurring. At a public meeting, an organizer from the Sierra Club of Michigan stated, and I quote, "Canadians should keep their eye on the ordinance's fate," end of quote. Taking him at his word, the Public Advisory Council sent an email informing the Sierra Club of Michigan that our Public Advisory Council was indeed keeping their eye on the ordinance, also informing the governments of Canada, Ontario, and the City of Windsor. The Public Advisory Council stressed its support for the actions by US federal, state, and local governments to remediate the contaminated sites and prevent further occurrences. Our understanding is remediation is going full swing as we speak. I'm not sure just when it will be completed. Finally, regarding the long-awaited Ojibwe Shores land swap with the City of Windsor, for months and years, we've been hearing about a land swap whereby the city would purchase a property and then trade it to the Port Authority for the Ojibwe Shores, the 33 acres that anchor the Ojibwe complex on the river. I contacted Steve Salmons, who is the CEO of the Port Authority, to find his take on the progress of it. He emailed me back, and I quote from his email. I can confirm that yes, the city and the Port Authority are engaged on a solution. I remain optimistic that an announcement will be made before the end of the summer that will provide the port with an alternative property for economic development and the community with Ojibwe Woods as a natural heritage area under municipal management, end of quote. Now, we've been hearing about this potential land swap for a while. We've been disappointed before. Maybe this time things will happen. We're hoping so. We're optimistic, and it will be a delight for me personally and for the Public Advisory Council and the citizens of Windsor if this land swap can take place. And that concludes my report. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Tom. I really appreciate it. And so now we'll enter our question and answer period of the evening. And so a question for Shane. And a reminder, if you have any questions, just put it in the Q&A box. We've got a bit of time to ask some questions. So there's a question for Shane. It says, cormorant guano is very toxic to vegetation. Why should cormorants be protected?
One thing to keep in mind is that cormorants are not protected the same way that herring gulls are. Most birds in Canada are actually protected under the Migrant Bird Act, which is privy for the Canadian Wildlife Service or the federal government. Cormorants, however, are excluded from the Migrant Bird Act, and they are actually protected only under the province. So I'm not quite sure the legislation is called for the province, but it's a provincial responsibility for double-crested cormorants and not the federal government. And there are some protections for it, but you can also get permits from the province to actually control cormorant levels, and some people have done that. The other thing is, well, to put into perspective, I remember someone telling me that they were kind of upset that cormorants were actually in Algonquin Park. And yes, there's actually a small colony in, I forget which lake, in Algonquin Park, and people were worried, oh, they're going to kill the trees. I just pointed out to him, of course, well, how many trees are actually cut down by forestry relative to the trees killed by cormorants? Of course, it differs by about like 4 orders of magnitude. Most of the habitat loss they see in Southern Ontario is not from cormorants. It's actually relatively small compared to human activities. So I guess that's the way I look at it, is that on the big picture, they don't damage that much. Having said that, they are being controlled in certain areas. Parks Canada, for example, has been controlling cormorants in certain areas to try to protect trees.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. While I have you, I know that you mentioned in your presentation that colonial water birds have kind of disappeared from the Detroit River, and I'm wondering if you have any idea on where they've gone.
No. Well, it's hard to tell where the herring gulls went because there were never that many of them. There's only a few dozen, but there were about 20,000 ring-billed gulls, half of which were on Fighting Island and half of which were on Turkey Island. There was a small colony of black-crowned night herons that were in Turkey Island. And all these birds, all 3 species, stopped nesting in the same year. So in 2011, they were there. In 2012, they were gone. I heard some vague things about more ringbills being seen somewhere in the States, and someone who goes to Middle Island and Lake Erie said, no, it seems like there's a bit more herring gulls than normal there. So it's possible that they moved to Middle Island, which is not that far away. So that doesn't surprise me. But the big question is why they left, and that I have no idea. I mean, there is some talk about whether or not it could have been, I'm not saying I really believe this strongly, but the timing in which the gulls and the herons left was when the Windsor hum started. Whether or not that has any impact upon them, I don't know. There was one study in the United States somewhere where they were putting these generators for whatever purpose, and they were actually looking at birds breeding before and after they put it in these generators, and the species richness or diversity stayed the same before and after put these generators, but all the large-bodied birds disappeared after they put these generators in. It is vaguely possible that the hum actually would have disturbed them, but that's just utter speculation. The hum right here is actually disappeared, so maybe it'll come back. We'll see.
Awesome. And then there was also a question regarding the gull population and why it's dropped so dramatically when 20 years ago, Fighting Island had a large ring gull population.
Well, the populations of gulls and other clean water birds have been increasing since the 70s. They went down in the 70s. In fact, cormorants, they went from a high of about 40,000 pairs in the 1940s to about a dozen pairs in the 1970s, mostly because the eggs wouldn't hatch, because of eggshell thinning, things like that. Gulls weren't quite as heavily impacted, but they went down pretty low. But then they started to increase over time up until I think the 1990s or so, where they sort of hit the peak again and they started declining. Some of it we think is due to a reduction in productivity of fisheries in Great Lakes, particularly like if you look at Lake Huron. The amount of fish you actually see in Lake Huron now compared to, let's say, 10, 15 years ago is actually quite a bit lower. Is because of the lower productivity in general. And some people think it's because the Great Lakes, because we're not dumping near as much phosphorus and the nutrients in Great Lakes, they're actually going back to closer to the more original conditions of lower productivity, which of course would decrease the amount of fish availability, and thus that would impact the populations of fish-eating birds. Now, ringbills are not going to be near as affected because they feed quite heavily terrestrially, but cormorants and herring gulls feed primarily aquatically, and so that could be one reason why they're sort of declining.
Awesome, that was a great answer. Thanks, Shane. A question for Brianna or Nikki. So you mentioned that there's an osprey stand at the Sturgeon Creek restoration site. And I'm just wondering if it has been occupied or if you've been able to observe any ospreys on that stand.
We were out at the site the other day. It doesn't appear that there have been any ospreys there. We are hopeful that with the habitat restoration that soon will change. Part of what we're going to do, and I think this, we can't say for sure, it may have been utilized, but we don't have a management plan in place yet. So Brianna and her team are currently working on that management plan, which will include regular monitoring, so that we can either provide materials that would lend to that habitat and being able to establish that nest. But we're incorporating that now. So according to our site visit the other day, it doesn't appear that there is.
Okay, well, we look forward to hearing more and hearing what amendments, if any, that you do to try to attract the ospreys. That sounds great. So, Kevin, question for you. What restoration projects were you able to complete this spring? I know that you mentioned last spring you weren't able to do them, but just wondering what happened this spring.
Yeah, sure. I don't have the breakdown in terms of the area of concern versus the rest of the region in front of me. But this past spring, we actually had a very busy season, primarily because we didn't plant trees last year, and most of the landowners that we worked with just held off for a year, and we implemented those projects this year. This year, we were successful in planting slightly over 100,000 trees, which is just a fabulous number for us. That's a lot of trees to put in the ground. In addition to that, we also have a private system set up where landowners who are eligible can simply purchase trees and plant them on their own. And we distributed almost 25,000 trees that way. So huge demand for trees this year, which was just absolutely fabulous to see.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And so I'm just going to end it off here. Let me just pull up my ending presentation. So that concludes our Detroit River evening. I just wanted to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I hope that you did too, and that you enjoyed the event. Let me just share this here. Hold on a second. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. Okay, and so I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming and to thank the presenters for giving informative talks on the work they're doing in the Detroit River and to improve the environment in general. We've made a lot of progress and are proud of our current status and are excited to continue this great work. And so we'd like to thank the DRCC partners who have helped us make progress on cleaning the river. And so on a final note, I just wanted to remind you that our 2020-2021 annual report, where you can find more information on the work we've done over the past year, is available for download from our website, detroitriver.ca. And so our updated work plan, the pathway to delisting document, can also be downloaded from our website. And this document outlines our planned work over the next year and for future years. And so if you'd like to keep current on what the DRCC is up to, you can follow us on social media. And if my slide showed up correctly, you can see our handles here, or you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. And so the sign up link is available on our website. And so as you leave the webinar, there will be a short survey to collect feedback on the event. And so if you have a minute to fill it out, it would be greatly appreciated. So again, thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.